This show is sponsored by idealworkspace.com, which promotes a healthier way of working through their adjustable standing desk. Check out their latest smart adjustable standing desk at altizen.com, altizen.com. Welcome to Analyse Asia, the podcast dedicated to dissect the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. In this episode, I speak to Alan Chan, co-founder of Vectr Ventures in Hong Kong. We discuss his general perspectives as an investor on how Vectr Ventures invests in startups and the evolution of the Hong Kong startup ecosystem. Hi, Alan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Where are you based in now?
I'm actually based in Hong Kong, but on the plane a good amount, so let's call it Hong Kong for now.
That's good. And I'm talking to Alan Chan, co-founder of Vectr Ventures. And I got this through an introduction from another podcaster friend of mine, Jay Kim. So, Alan, it's really great to have you on the show. In fact, you're probably the first venture capitalist I speak to about the investor scene in Hong Kong and, of course, your work with Vectr Ventures. Before I start, I would like to get to know you better. How did you start your career?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. So I started my career, I think much like many individuals in Hong Kong. I came back from university and I immediately jumped into investment banking around 2006. So, that was the hot sector, high-paying job at the time. All the Chinese companies IPOing, and so I was in investment banking, covering financial institutions for the first 3 years of my career.
How do you end up going into venture capital then?
Yeah, so my journey is it's not very direct. We started Vectr in 2014. So in between, after quitting and leaving my banking job, she moved to China at that point and joined another startup. So I was part of someone else's startup as a product manager, and we were fleshing out, building a children's educational theme park. And so very different, very capital heavy, and not a startup in terms of what we think of nowadays. And then we did that in Shanghai for around 6 to 7 months. Unfortunately, due to circumstances outside of our company, we weren't able to find and partner with the greatest location that we had found, and because of that, building a physical location was a bit tough. We ended up scaling back, and the founder decided to pull the plug. And so after that, I came back to Hong Kong and started working in the family office. So looking at real estate, market, private equity, alternative investments across the board, and spending time in China, Europe predominantly, and some stuff in the US. So I did that for a while. Around 2010, I met my then co-founder in really our first startup, or our first startup I've ever sort of built myself from scratch, and we built a ticketing and entertainment platform in China. So it was a merger of Fandango, Ticketmaster, and Perez Hilton Online, if you will, all mashed into a web and mobile application. And so we did that and for a while, and ended up selling the company to a Chinese conglomerate in early 2014. And then in the meantime, I also picked up a few other things. I tried to build another startup in the middle, focused on the NGO space, trying to create some impact there, which I quickly found is easier said than done. And at the same time, during that, started doing some personal investments, just being back in tech again and spending time in a family office and doing investments, and sort of circled back in to start doing some early stage tech investments, and which point, started sharing some deals and built a very small private syndicate. All those different experiences, I guess, built up towards, after selling the company, of, okay, so what should we do next? And it seemed like investments and early stage technology and whatnot seemed to be where it was interesting and where I found myself most interested, and that was what I was doing the past few years. And so, all the different things, starting from the machine and going into different gigs, and eventually, led to Vectr Ventures.
And there's a pretty interesting backstory you have there. So throughout your career journey, what are the interesting career lessons you can share with my audience?
I think the biggest lessons are, I realized a few things. I realized different groups are very specific and very big and good at what they're doing for a reason. And, there's a reason there's not one company that sort of does everything for everyone. That's one lesson I quickly learned while starting to, being part of someone else's company and building my own, is that focus is really important, and boiling the ocean, so to speak, is definitely not the way to go. So that's one lesson. Second lesson, I think, is about growth and realizing that a business, coming from my first job, a business to me was very Excel sheet oriented and pitch deck oriented, and everything is very like theoretical and just cut costs here, increase revenue there, and it's sort of like these like no shit type of answers. But once you get in the trenches, I realized it's very difficult. Cut 20% cost, sure, but so which 20% of the people are you going to fire? I mean, it's not easy. And what I realized was, some of the things maybe I've said to people in my time as a banker or as my time as an investor sometimes was maybe a little bit simplified and not very sensitive. But I say, this is easy, why can't you just do that? So I think that's really one big So first lesson is don't boil the ocean. Second lesson I learned is that focus and implementation and execution is really 90% of everything. And then I guess my last lesson, which was, one that I learned not in the easiest way, is particularly about the Chinese market, which is when looking at markets, especially China at the time, realizing the inflection point that China had already gone past the point of requiring outside assistance, being interested in your user habits, being interested in what you use and how you use it, and you're being the outside world. And what I realized was, the market got big enough where they don't care. They still have their own habits. They have their own products. They have their own methodology. And to, sort of realize that, cookie cutting doesn't always work as well. And so learning that about China and learning that in general was a very important lesson, I think, especially for, a venture investor trying to invest across the globe, is to really be culturally sensitive and understanding at the same time, and how that affects your business and the market.
That comes to the main subject of the day, which is to talk to you about Vectr Ventures and also the investor scene in Hong Kong. So I'm going to start off with Vectr Ventures first. What's the motivation behind starting Vectr Ventures for you and your co-founder?
So what we realized was, there are a lot of companies around the world doing very interesting things, but, Greater China is a tough market to crack. So are the different countries in Southeast Asia. So is, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. And so what we realized was, hey, so it is interesting, it was driven by interest first of, getting involved and investing in early stage companies and trying to find, the next big thing, right? The dream of investing in something at less than 10 million and having it IPO at 100 billion or 10 billion or even 1 billion, it doesn't matter. So that's the dream which drove everything. But over time, it was also a combination of interest, what we believed in our network and what we believed we could execute on and the strengths of that. That was the motivation behind how we started Vectr. And it didn't all come together at once. But, over time, we started learning different lessons and piecing different parts of the puzzle together to get to where we are today. But, that's sort of what was the initial idea, was starting from our syndicate days, is that tech was very interesting. It can be very capital efficient and it's high risk, which makes it exciting, but that there was real value there, if you could spend the time and see the right companies and get lucky enough to be involved with the right companies. And so it was sort of a combination of those things.
So what is your current role and coverage in Vectr Ventures then?
So my current role is to, drive the strategy and to mainly look over the investment side of Vectr. And so, fundraising to deal structuring to, making the investments to deal sourcing everybody does, and to sort of also set the general direction of the different strategies and teams within our company is what I spend most of my time on.
If I may ask, what is the mission and vision of Vectr Ventures? Where do you see the Vectr Ventures going towards as a venture capital firm then?
Yeah, so for us, that's a great question, because that is exactly the question we asked ourselves many, many times. Myself at many times, and as a group of 3 co-founders many times, of, so why us? What's the difference? There's thousands of funds out there. Everyone can write checks. Everyone can spend time, and there's tons of experts. And so why us? And so what we realized was a combination of things, including how we wanted to work with our companies and actually how we didn't want to work. The vision and mission of Vectr. So the mission of Vectr is to, very pragmatically, to invest in great companies that have huge potential and to be able to return way more capital back to our investors than they gave us. I mean, that's that's the mission, right? But the vision of how we want to execute that is a little bit, nuanced or complicated. Is that we both want to be an investor, but we also want to be able to directly be involved with helping our companies, expand in the region, think about product, and generally think about strategy, business growth, and technology when it comes to expanding into a different part of the world. And so what we ended up doing is, we want to be the best partner for Greater China and sometimes Asia Pacific expansion for our portfolio companies, but to be some type of guide so that we can help them avoid all the pitfalls and all the things that I've done wrong and my co-founders have done wrong in their business. And so really is to be a real partner that can not only write the check, but to be in the trenches and really help build product, really help think about product, think about practical problems like, the cloud and jumping over the wall and a variety of things. And that's our vision, is to be the best partner for our companies in expanding into the region or even within the region, and with a very hands-on and sort of hybrid and a dynamic approach versus just writing the check.
A very curious question. Do you have an investment thesis? And if so, can you share? What is it?
We have evolving investment thesis. And so because of the way we were set up, we do not have a very firm and specifically, sort of cornered mandate of like what stage and what types of companies we can invest in. Our thesis changes and we have new ones that come up as we see the world evolve. So over 3 years, we've invested across almost every single sector, pretty much other than biotech and, healthcare. And we've covered robotics, IoT, VR, AR, other digital media, B2B, B2C software, fintech, impact-driven consumer brands, and, even some education. So we like to think of ourselves as being in like a dynamic position, which makes it maybe a bit difficult. But with our network and our investors, we're sort of put in that position because they do cover a lot and they do a lot. And so we try to be as helpful and as smart as we can in both helping our companies and helping our corporate partners and investors alike.
And I went through your website on Vectr Ventures, and I know that you have a pretty interesting team. Do you want to share, like, for example, your co-founder and who they are and some of your team members of Vectr Ventures and what are their specialization?
Yeah, so we have a few different functions. So across the founders, there's myself, ex-banker, startup investment, and then this. And then my other co-founder, Arthur, who has also has built his own companies, has been part of large corporations doing sales across the Pacific, trying to get things from China into the US and vice versa, and also in the family office of real estate. And then we've got a third partner who is ex-Waterloo IBM and then moved back to China and built his own ad tech company in China for a while. And then also is helping on his family business side, which is related to real estate. But in China, that touches a lot of different things. And so, all three of us ultimately have this undertone of like real estate involved from family-wise to sort of historically. But so those are like three co-founders, and we've all met at different times. Arthur and I have been, pretty much part of the same group and, best friends since kindergarten. And then Adrian, I met while building my startup, the ticketing startup, because it was based in Guangzhou and he was based in Guangzhou. And we met during a due diligence meeting where we were both sent to go do due diligence on something on behalf of, our family office and investors. And that's how we met. And so the three of us, became, very good friends and started working together. And then other members of our team, we've got someone that 12 years in Adobe Advanced Research Lab to 10 plus years in Microsoft and spent time in Zynga and building games and products his whole career, to, people that are in finance that have been in both buy-side research and then investment relations and hedge funds and mutual funds, to, bankers also turned into entrepreneurs / operators, which have joined us. And then, we've got other more specialized like data scientists. And then our investment team are from a variety of backgrounds, like, private banking, consulting, straight out of university even. And so, our team, we would like to say, like, is fairly diverse, and we like it that way. We like to have very different views, experiences, and different voices so that we try to cover as many angles as possible whenever we have one conversation.
So how do you identify founders of startups to invest in? What are the key traits you look in them then?
If we go very early stage, I like to think about the motivations behind a founder and why they're doing something. And what's really important to me is also, other than why they're doing it, is why they think they can do it. Not only what drives them, but what differentiates them. And by that, it really is important to me to also, through that conversation, to see if this founder is practical and understands what battle he's fighting, or slightly delusional on how simple or how effective or how great what they're doing is. And so that's a really important part of a founder or founders. When it comes to founders, I like to see why they're working together, what tells me that this is a good team. Like, did they just meet? Did they meet on some online platform? And the key is to figure out how easy it is for these guys to just walk away from each other. And that's really, really important. We've invested in companies before where it seems like a great team, and then when things go down, you really need a very solid and unified founding team. And that is not always the case. You want people that are willing to sink and swim together versus suddenly start pushing people down to stay afloat. And those things are really important. And of course, on top of that is academic background, working experience, domain expertise, and those are sort of the hard skills. But on the soft side is really to try to understand why them, why now, and what are they doing this for? And those things are really important to us.
How do you help founders when their startups are in trouble? I mean, what are the do-nots you usually tell them, and how do you help them to mitigate it then?
This part is interesting. I mean, I think the do-nots, what I've learned now is do not help a founder figure out how their business works. When I first started investing, I would get very excited when I find companies that I feel like I can give a lot of value and can give a lot of input and give a lot of direction, which this founder accepts. What I've realized now is that there's fundamentally a problem with that, because someone that spends 1,000 times more time on a subject than I do, if they can take my opinion on something that quickly and it's something they haven't thought about, that's not a good thing. And so what I've realized as a do not push words, strategy, or methodology into a founder that they don't agree with, because one, they'll either do it off of what they believe, so they can't do it well, or two, they'll tell you that they're doing it and they're actually not, which doesn't help anybody. Or lastly is, if I wanted to run somebody's business, I would have started that business versus starting like a VC or being in my position. And so what I learned, a do not, is what I've been, even talking to my team, is help them think about strategy, help them think about how to execute, help them think about how to make life easier, but do not be the one driving their business of this is how your business should be, this is how you should do it, and this is the ways to go about it, and with this method. And that has never worked, in my opinion, because you need the founders to be the driving force behind it, and not you driving them and turning them into your employee effectively.
That's pretty good words of wisdom, because ultimately founders actually are the ones who should be driving their company with their own vision, but getting advice from the venture investors. I thought I would want to ask, what are the interesting companies on the Vectr Ventures portfolio then?
Oh, depends what you find interesting. I mean, number-wise and name-wise, I would say, one of our most interesting companies is a company called NextVR. They do live broadcasting of sports, music, and other live events through VR. So they take you to the front row. They take you into the seat. And that has done, very well for us, and it's a great company. Another one that I'm very excited about that, just recently announced a Series B in Hong Kong is a company called Day Cook. And she is the young, dynamic version of, China's Martha Stewart, if you want to put it that way, but a very new generation. And she's doing great work. Norma is, tons of traffic, lots of fans, great content, an evolving brand, and really being able to establish brand value from a purely independent digital media channel, like how she first started, which has been a long 3 to 4 years, but it was from 200 something thousand viewers a month out of Hong Kong to last month doing north of 250 million views in a month. And that's significant progression, and we giggle about it sometimes, even just who would have guessed? That's a lot of zeros on top of it. And that has been an amazing journey to be part of. But personally, there's companies we're involved in, Land Life company is a company we invest in Amsterdam, that it's something very important to me, and I really believe in the vision and are helping and hope that it picks up and becomes a big business, because it needs to become a big business or PSO to fulfill the vision, which I think all your listeners should want. And what they do is they have a method and technology to grow trees in places where traditionally the average might be single digit yield, if not zero yield. And they've been able to produce results north of 70%, if not 80% most of the time in the harshest places. And they're able to reforest just broken and destroyed land, which, as we all know, is growing at a very unhealthy pace. And, trying to save the world from us before we start making other technology prevalent. I feel, that's very important to me, because I think it's a great business. And it also has a great end goal by helping transform, the world and making an impact and, sort of touching everybody, and hopefully in a very long lasting and meaningful way. And so I find them all very interesting in different ways, but I can always find our own portfolio interesting because I'm inherently biased, right?
Okay, then I'll ask the follow-up question then. I thought I didn't ask this, but I know that your investments are not limited to Hong Kong, right? It also extends to overseas. Where else do you invest in then?
So our portfolio is actually around 70% in the US and Europe, and the other remaining 30% between Asia Pacific. We only have one portfolio company in China. And so our thesis is really to invest outwards and look for things that could make sense coming this way. And that's where we try to provide value in product partnerships and even further capital. And that's where we try to be most valuable to our portfolio companies.
I want to come to talk to you about the Hong Kong investor ecosystem. First of all, I want to get your investor's lens and see how does the Hong Kong startup ecosystem have evolved from your perspective as an investor.
So the startup side, there's been a lot of iterations, I think. So copy the Hong Kong models to tweaking models in Hong Kong to now seeing more and more just coming right out of the box and saying hey, we see a certain value here. It's not based on anything, but of course there's similar businesses. But really be able to start companies from a real driven internal belief versus just saying, oh, this works in London, so why don't I try it here? And we've seen an evolution of that even over the past few years. Of course, increasing amount of conferences and corporate storing events and just all types of things in the ecosystem. That has really been a big change. We were talking to a founder once, and I was saying, if you're gonna spend your next 2 years trying to follow your dreams anyways, you might as well try to follow your dreams, which should make sense in a business case first. You might as well follow your own dreams versus implementing someone else's dreams and telling yourself that it's yours, because chances are 90% chance that it probably won't work anyways. So you might as well go for something you truly believe in and something you think has size and something you want to do, because it's not fun being a startup founder. And those nights and those days where you're just why am I sitting here? What the hell am I doing? Those nights and those days, you need to have your own belief to drive you forward, right? And not to be I picked the wrong thing and now I'm stuck because I have investor money and I have a team and what am I supposed to do? Seen as a big of people that have found things and didn't work, and then tried to be a little more bold and then and even a little more bold. And also the increasing amount of multinational tech companies hiring teams across Asia Pacific. There's a lot more talent now that is just seeing how things should be done, how other companies run things, and to believe that hey, maybe I can't build Uber, but I see a lot of problems that I can stack and I can figure out how to address those markets. And so I've seen a big evolution there in terms of the companies and like founders and, the types of pitches and people we see nowadays has really changed over the past few years.
And where do you see the challenges of Hong Kong startup ecosystem from your perspective? Like, for example, in Singapore, we are a small population of 5 million people. So there's no choice but for the startup to quickly think about scaling into the other markets. I think similarly, Hong Kong and Singapore are pretty similar because we are both financial centers and we have a relatively small population. Where do you see the challenges come from then?
I think one of the biggest challenges in Hong Kong, I think for Singapore at least, the obvious market seems to be Southeast Asia, right in the middle of it. I think the problem with Hong Kong is going north or going south is not well defined in terms of when you scale. Do you scale into China or do you scale down into Southeast Asia just like Singapore? And I think that is something that is not easy and hard to navigate. Hong Kong, again, is also a small market, but we do have a huge tourist market, right? Several times our population. So what do you do and how do you build a business? And can you build a business based out of Hong Kong that really services many other markets? So I think that inherently is interesting to think about, just like what types of businesses scale well from one place versus needing to set up like a directory and then needing to replicate that over 100 cities versus servicing 100 cities from one place. And I think, it has similar issues as Singapore, but market is small. And again, quickly thinking about expansion, capital sometimes of like, so who do you go for funding? Hong Kong investors, Chinese investors, or like other Asian Pacific investors? Or do you go for the US? If Israel can go for the US, why can't Hong Kong or Singapore, right? Just, what's the difference? And so I think it has like similar difficulties, but maybe a little bit of cabin fever too, right? Like you're always in Hong Kong, it's a great place, much like Singapore. And then if you only think about this market, how many things are there truly to disrupt and how many things are interesting to build as a service and how many things of those actually turn out to be interesting for investors. And I think that's also very different. And so within a small market, once you talk about expansion into countries and cultures and laws that are different, I think that is fundamentally very difficult and complicated. So, Hong Kong definitely has that problem of north or south.
I always thought that the natural instinct for startups from Hong Kong is actually going north to China because for that market, once you get one of the cities right, you could actually scale across the rest of the mainland China cities. So maybe we just never see from your perspective that actually can go north and south in that perspective.
Well, yeah, because the thing is, right, Hong Kong's domestic culture is only probably marginally less different than like Singapore and China, if that makes sense, right? So because of that divide, just because we're right next to it doesn't mean anything. China is like very daunting, right? Like we don't invest in China because I realized back then that like China doesn't need our input. Like we need their input. Like in terms of innovation and fintech and products and everything. Hong Kong doesn't really have much other than the stock market to like be teaching. In many ways, they have more innovative tech products. They have bigger tech companies. Their tech companies are further reaching into our daily life. Even in real estate, they have like more innovative like design and real estate restriction laws. They have more complex like mixed properties. They have better and more like, innovative laws and to rip down old and put up new things. And there's a lot of things that I realize I'm like, hey, what's the advantage? There is no advantage. And so, that's a really big part of it, I think. That's one of the lessons, right, of realizing the center of the universe sort of mentality, is not helpful and it just doesn't really help. And so being from Hong Kong, China's right there, but it's a totally different market. I might as well go to the US.
I have a question to ask before I get into the last question of the day. I see from your profile that you have been very into environment protection and the issues that matters to the environment. Is that an interest of yours, or is this something that you have been really focused on building a social enterprise on top of it at some point?
This is just a personal thing. I just really believe that we're very good at producing things, but we're not very good at figuring out how to produce it without pretty much killing everything. I think the environment and whatnot is something that's very important. I enjoy it. I'm not like a super outdoors person, but I enjoy nature, like being out there in like summer, winter, and like even on vacation, going to the beautiful places. And it's just a personal passion and something that I believe is definitely a long-term goal, because every day that I've been alive, I think the problem's only gotten worse, and it actually never has gotten any better. And so I think it's a very worthwhile thing for myself to be passionate about, and to see like what ways there are to, do a little bit, whatever it is. And I just, without that, like there's nothing else. And so, of all issues that I choose to be very, very interested in, nature is the one.
I just have to add that Alan is a Board of Trustees member, China, for the Nature Conservancy that is based in Beijing, China. So it's pretty interesting. He has a very interesting background to actually tell his backstory on that. But it always comes to my last and final question. How do my audience find you?
Most of the time they find me, for a quick response, is through a warm introduction, much like, like Jay. If I get connected with people through introductions, I can be very, very fast at replying. What I'm not very good at is replying sort of cold calls, just because it's sort of one of these 80-20 rules I set for myself. And so, walking up to me in an event is one way, but generally through introductions is the fastest and surefire way that, I will 100% reply and be reachable.
And do you have social media handles that people can contact you on?
Yeah, I do. I use Twitter and LinkedIn as my two main ones. Facebook and Instagram I sort of keep just to myself. But on those ones too, I'll respond sometimes, but I'm not very good at responding if it's, I can't really see the connection, or if it's just like a random ad or direct message. Then I'm a little bit wary, just because, not that I'm trying to be, selective, because my time is so important, but it's just because, I need to be able to prioritize for those that I'm already working with and in contact with. And so, it's better to get in touch with me and ping me through people I already know.
And you can find me at bleongcw@bernardleong.com. Subscribe to us at Analyse Asia, ANALYSE Asia. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Acast, TuneIn, and of course Google Play in the US market. Tweet to me, recommend us on Overcast, give us a 5-star rating on the iTunes store. And of course, most important, drop me your feedback. Once again, Alan, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Bernard.